Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Good. I'm Professor Nancy Horowitz. I'm the director of the Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight. Thank you for coming through Red Sox traffic and whatever you had to do to get here, parking, etc. So thank you. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Rabbi David Wolpe. He's been a voice of guidance for us for quite a while now as we navigate these really difficult times of increased anti-Semitism, of tensions on campus, and all the other concerns that we've been dealing with since October 7th. A lot of difficult questions. How can we accommodate the amount of stress, of sheer stress caused by the war, the atrocities? How do we think about them? How do we talk about it? And by the rising anti-Semitism as well. How and what can we learn about anti-Semitism, which is one of the reasons that we invited Rabbi Wolpe to come and speak to us tonight. And finally, how do we sit with conflict and how do we engage in difficult conversations? I'm very grateful he took time out of his schedule to come and speak to us. He is the Max Weber Emeritus Rabbi of Sinai Temple and a visiting scholar at the Harvard Divinity School. He's the author of 8 books, including the national bestseller, Making Loss Matter, Creating Meaning in Difficult Times. He's been named the most influential rabbi in America by Newsweek and among the 50 most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post. He's taught at Harvard and a number of other universities, including UCLA, Hunter College, Pepperdine, and the Jewish Theological Seminary, and has written for the New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, and the Jerusalem Post, among other publications. In addition, he's engaged in widely watched public debates about religion and its place in the world. His resignation from the Anti-Semitism Advisory Committee at Harvard gained a lot of attention. He may speak about that a little bit. His most recent book is David, the Divided Heart, a biography of King David. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi David Wolpe. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your coming, especially because this is not always such an uplifting topic to be hearing about. So I have to start with an old joke. I have a repertoire of anti-Semitism jokes, so I will choose this one for this evening. It's actually a joke from Eastern Europe about 2 men who are going by a church, and it said, "Come in, convert, get 50 rubles." So Shlomi says to Yitzchak, "I'm going to go. I'm going to do it." Yitzchak says, "Really? You're going to convert?" He goes, "I'm going to convert. I could use the money. We don't have much food. I'm going to go." So he goes, Yitzchak waits outside. Shlomi comes back out. He goes, "Did you convert?" Shlomi said, "Yeah." He said, "They pay you the 50 rubles?" Shlomi goes, "That's all you Jews think about is money." And the reason that I chose that joke is that one of the effects of anti-Semitism is how it touches Jews. We think we're exempt from it, but actually sometimes we absorb some of the stereotypes that the world foists on us. And part of the reason to learn about anti-Semitism is to inoculate ourselves against the stereotypes that we tend to take on because everybody's telling us this is what you're like. I want to start by mentioning a couple of the causes of anti-Semitism because it is in the history of the world sort of unique in the multi-causality of the hatreds that have affected the Jews over the years. And I want to start with the fundamental reason why there is anti-Semitism, which, and by the way, this is me, okay? This is not like the official anti-Semitism of the Jewish people proclamation. The main reason, though, is because I remember when I was growing up, there was a Rodgers and Hammerstein song, "Hatred has to be carefully taught." And that is not true. If you believe that people are fundamentally good, I suggest you visit a playground. What happens in a playground when a new kid comes? Do the other children go, "Oh, look, a new child. Let us share our toys and embrace him"? No, they say, get the new kid. And the reason is inbuilt in human beings, it's part of our evolutionary nature, is a distrust of the other. And for most of Jewish history, we have been the other. There was Christians and Jews. There were Muslims and Jews. We did not live in the kind of society that America is, where there were very many multiple groups. We were the identified other, and that already is a motivation for distrust and for hatred. This is supercharged, of course, by Christianity, because the sad thing about the Christian anti-Semitism is that really it was a family quarrel. I mean, the early Christians were all Jews. And I'm sure it's not true here, but among some families, family quarrels are the most vicious quarrels that there are, right? And you say things to people in your family that you would never say to a stranger. And unfortunately, that's what happened between Jews, early Jews, who accepted Jesus, and Jews who didn't, except that it got enshrined in a sacred book so that it never changed. And one of the weird anomalies about anti-Semitism is that it is the only hatred that makes those who are hated both subhuman and superhuman at the same time, right? The Nazis called us vermin, and yet we controlled the world. I don't know if you know this about us, but we do. Which is another thing about Jewish hatred, is it's almost always some kind of conspiracy theory. But the reason that we control the world is that if you are powerful enough to kill a god, then you're superhuman. And so there is around the Jews this weird mythology, this mythos, that we are somehow super powerful, right? We control the media, we control Hollywood, we control Washington, we control the Zionist. Have you ever heard of Zog? It is the Zionist organized government, right? We control the government. Doesn't matter who's in power, Democrat, Republican, we control the government, and on and on and on. And that sort of mythos of the superhuman, I think, can be traced back in part to we killed God. We're also a small enough group that we are hateable without much danger, but we are big enough to make us worth hating, or at least influential enough to make us worth hating. And then there is the fact that because Jews especially have been wanderers and have been around the world, we are really good at creating political coalitions, by which I don't mean Jews are good at creating political coalitions. I mean political coalitions are effectively created around Jews. This you can see, by the way, in Nazi Germany. It was only in 1870 that the word anti-Semitism was created. By the way, the reason, do you know why anti-Semitism is called anti-Semitism? Because Wilhelm Marr in 1870, a German, wanted to give Jew hatred a more scientific sounding name. So he called it anti-Semitism, which is why when people say, I can't be an anti-Semite because I'm a Semite, it's ridiculous and ahistorical and ignorant and also not true. But from 1870, it was only another 20 years before there was an anti-Semitic mayor. And then what knit all those powers together? It was a common enemy, the Jew. What ties 27, 29, 20, depending on how you count, Arab nations together? They don't get along with one another, but they can all hate Jews. So we see even in America, how do you get such a strange sign as something like Queers for Hamas, when we all know that Hamas would kill homosexuals, torture and kill homosexuals if they had the opportunity, but the creation of a coalition around hatred of Jews is that effective. And so what you get is these people who are the subject of a conspiracy theory, who are the other in some way, and can be used to hate whatever you want to hate. And by that I mean hatred of Jews is a protean hatred. If you hate capitalists, you can hate Jews. If you hate communists, you can hate Jews. You can hate Jews for being weak and stateless and wandering and taking people's jobs, or for being powerful and having a state. You can hate Jews for being wearing Western clothing and walking around without markers of Judaism as if they're really trying to fit in and pretend they're not Jewish. But you can also hate them for wearing long black coats and having side curls and being obviously Jewish and other than the rest of us. It doesn't matter, whatever it is, and this is part of the appeal of anti-Semitism throughout history, whatever it is that is your identified hatred, you can use Jews to foist that hatred upon. Which is why, what is the one absolutely legitimate hatred that everybody is allowed to have in the 21st century, apart from the Yankees? Everybody allowed to have in the 21st. I say that only because I'm in Boston. That's the only reason I would risk a Yankee joke. Look, I grew up in Philadelphia, so we feel the same way. But the one thing everyone can hate is a Nazi, right? You want to make an enemy in a movie, they're a Nazi. So what happens with the Jews? Now the Jews are Nazis. Do you know how much Nazi imagery has been used lately in anti-Semitism describing Israel? Because you can hate Nazis. So here we have what we're all allowed to hate. Therefore, the Jew is that. Like the Jew was the arch communist, like the Jew was the arch capitalist, whatever it was that the society hated, that's what they made the Jew into. And on campus today, what is the most hated thing that everybody agrees is terrible is a settler colonialist. And therefore, the Jews are settler colonialists. And when we argue, no, we're not, because colonialists are people who come from one place and take over another. And first of all, we came from there. And second of all, settler colonialists are not refugees, and we were refugees. And settler colonialists don't give land back. They use it to exploit resources, and we gave the Sinai back, and on and on and on. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because this is not an argument from a place of logic. It's an argument from a place of I have identified that which I hate, and in time-honored fashion, I will make the Jew into the thing that I'm allowed to hate. Now, I don't think for a minute that the students at BU or Harvard or Columbia or anywhere else sit down and say, you know what? I hate settler colonialists, so that's what I'm going to call Jews. No, this process is so deeply, endemically rooted in the Western consciousness, and I'll get to West and not West in a second, that it happens almost automatically. Almost automatically, right? Jews are parasites. That's what Henry Ford called them. Why? Because nobody likes a parasite. Right? It was an easily identified bad thing, and so therefore the Jews were that. And what has happened today, in part, is the greatest. Look, one of the things that should make us optimistic, and I think there are things to make us optimistic. I want to get you depressed first, and then at the end, I will leave you marginally less depressed. But one of the things that should make us optimistic is the recognition of how much the Christian world has changed. Right? I mean, we do not live in the Christian world of 100 years ago. We really don't. And we should be enormously grateful for that reality. But the roots of Christian anti-Semitism still very much exist and influence the world. Just to tell you one thing that once you hear it, it's hard to unhear. Eliezer Berkovitz, who was an Orthodox theologian, once said about Nazism, he said, it is true that the Nazis were not all Christians, but it is also true that they were all the children of Christians. And that's a very powerful statement. And what it means is, even when you reject part of the ideology, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an influence on you. And so, for example, before I get to the second point about this, the one I was going to, but now I'm taking a detour, when someone says, look at how the Jews are using their money to control colleges, they don't even realize that normally if Bill Gates used his money, they wouldn't say, look at how the Protestants are using their money. That's what donors do. It's not what Jews do. It's what donors do. When donors like a college, they give money. When they don't like it, they take money. That's not a Jewish behavior. It's a person with money who donates behavior. And by the way, all of those donors, their parents and their grandparents were peddlers. They didn't come from money. But nobody said, wow, that's amazing that all these people who made money in their lifetime, first of all, did so well, and second, are giving that money to institutions of higher learning. How wonderful that is. No, instead they say, look what the Jews are doing with their money, trying to control the colleges. It's very bad. So you can see how these images still exist and persist in public consciousness, even when you're not aware of it. But the other part of it is that the greatest single forgery in the history of anti-Semitism was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which we know was done in the 19th century by Russian, in the 1900s by Russian forgers, and we know who did it. Even though nobody, I hope, of any intellectual respectability in America or Western Europe believes that that is anything but a forgery, it's all over the Muslim world. All over the Muslim world. And they read it like history, not like forgery, which means that Christian anti-Semitism has now made the leap into, I mean, Islam had its version of anti-Semitism. It was sometimes bad, but never quite as toxic, at least not as consistently as Christian anti-Semitism, but now it is. And that's why, because I know that everybody has endless discussions about whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and I just want to give you my read on this. I don't believe that they are synonyms. That is it possible to be an anti-Zionist and not hate Jews? Absolutely. Such a thing is possible, and it is done. But the Venn diagram of overlap is very great. And the reason I say this in part is, first of all, because you and I both know that the world is awash in atrocities, always has been, and still is. And yet, when Assad kills hundreds of thousands of people, including, by the way, many Palestinians, not a word. When China puts the Uyghurs in genuine concentration camps, not a word. When Sudan exiles 7 million people, refugees, not a word. When Myanmar kills the Rohingya, not a word. When there is more, I don't know if you know this, there are more slaves in the world right now in absolute numbers than there have ever been in human history. The number one country is North Korea, but the next 6 are all Muslim countries. Eritrea, Mauritania, you could go on and on. You can look it up. It's easy to find on the internet. Is there a single protest against slavery, genuine slavery, anywhere on any college campus? No, not one. So when someone says Palestinian lives matter or Muslim lives matter, I don't believe them. They matter when the opponent is a Jew. That's when they matter. And again, I think that a lot of people to whom you would say this would be shocked to recognize that they practice that sort of outrage discrimination. I don't think they look at Assad and say, I don't care, but the Jews. And yet, the workings of anti-Semitism are clearly intertwined in the way people make their political reads of the world and what they care about and what they emphatically don't care about. And their sense of identification. We were talking about, I mean, you know that at Harvard, there's an anti-Semitism committee and there's an Islamophobia committee, and I have no doubt that there are incidents of Islamophobia on campus, and yet I am impressed by the fact that I know a number of Jews who have taken off their kippot, and I know lots of non-Arabs who are suddenly wearing keffiyehs. And that disjunction tells me something about the prevalence and the depth and also the sense of identification of hatred. Now, about hatred, I do want to make this distinction because I think it's important. And this, I know that Dara Horn spoke here, my friend and colleague, and she likes to make this distinction, and I'm glad she does because it's a crucial one. She talks about the difference between Purim anti-Semitism and Hanukkah anti-Semitism, right? Every Jewish holiday gets its own variety of anti-Semitism. So I'm sorry, Passover is coming up, and I should talk about Passover anti-Semitism, just so you have something to say at the Seder. But let's stick for a moment with Purim and Hanukkah. So Purim, for those of you who don't know, is a holiday in which there's an evil guy who wants to kill all the Jews, right? Hanukkah is not about killing all the Jews. Hanukkah is about making the Jews into Greeks. So Purim anti-Semitism is genocidal anti-Semitism. It's about killing a people. Hanukkah anti-Semitism is just about wiping out who you are. Just the Jews should no longer be Jews. Anti-Zionist Jews are okay because they're anti-Zionist. But Zionist Jews are not okay because they are clearly Jews. And my own, what I really want to do is gather like all the anti-Zionist Jews in a room and say to them, like, they're still not going to love you. I'm sorry. They're still not going to love you. Like, no matter how you bend yourself out of shape and change what it is, you're still Jewish. But I do think that there is a very, I know a lot of Jews who hide. And they hide in all sorts of ways. But mainly they hide because to be a Jew is to be other. And that's not comfortable. And to know that some people will look askance at you. And that's also not comfortable. And I'm aware of the fact that, like, when I walk, especially now, when I walk around Harvard, that people look at me and some of them probably can't stand my guts. And I don't revel in that. I don't like it. But I feel like that's not my problem. That Hanukkah anti-Semitism we can withstand, as long as it doesn't turn into Purim anti-Semitism. So the first answer to at least how you have these kinds of conversations and how you deal with this is to make clear that these things are true. And that also the other reason that some people put more emphasis on than I do, but I think that it is clearly at least part of this, is that for most of Western history, the Jew represented conscience to the West. We were the ones who introduced all these rules and the Ten Commandments and all of that stuff. And as Maurice Samuel once said, who's a Jewish author and scholar, he said, no one likes his alarm clock. And we were the alarm clock of the West, right? And even when we were persecuted, human beings are arranged in such a way that when you persecute someone, part of you knows. It's not like they didn't know somewhere that they were mistreating, and you don't like people that you mistreat because somewhere inside you, you're aware of it. And the way, in part, that you have these conversations, I hope, is by educating people as to these realities, and then also to have the ideological conversation, because we are lucky enough to have anti-Semitism of both the right and the left. And a lot of Jews only want to name the anti-Semitism of the wing that they're not a part of. And I would like to make you into equal opportunity anti-Semitism caller-outers. Because what you get is, well, what the left will say is the right tends to violent anti-Semitism, right? The left is not violent. And what the right will say is, well, the left is systemic. The right is not systemic. The right is a fringe, but the left is systemic. And I got to tell you, I'm not grading which is better or which is worse. I think they're both terrible. And it is crucial to try to upend either one. I mean, obviously on college campus, because the vast majority of people are left-wing, the anti-Semitism that is coming from the progressive side of the ledger and not from the right side of the ledger. But it is a dangerous undertaking to make Jews a political issue, right? To pick one side of the political and say, this is the only side that likes us, the other side doesn't. We don't want to do that with Israel, and we don't want to do it with Judaism. So I really do, I do encourage you to try to spot both. And also, I think progressive anti-Semitism has become a much more apparent enemy of the Jews in the past several years. And that goes back to the settler colonialism, which I am certainly willing to talk about more if you want to in the question and answer period, which will be soon. The strap on my watch broke, so this is the only way that I know what time it is. The last couple things I want to say are, first of all, I really think that it is a mistake to despair. I don't think that when people say, for example, could it happen here? My answer is no. And it's not because I think Americans are nicer than other people or we have a constitution, but America is fundamentally different from reason that I mentioned at the beginning, which is that in America, there are so many groups that there isn't an identified other. For most of Jewish history, there were the French and the Jews and the Russians and the Jews and the Germans and the Jews and the Syrians and the Jews. There aren't Americans and Jews. There are lots and lots of different groups. And so part of our task as Jews is to create coalitions, to find other groups. And there are other groups who are very sympathetic to Jews and sympathetic to the Jewish predicament, and we can help and who can help us. That's one. The second is Jews are much better at identifying enemies than we are at embracing friends. It's amazing how much we don't thank our friends. And I don't care what side of the political spectrum they're on. And I don't care if they don't do everything that we like, right? This is what we have a tendency also to do. We're with you, we're with you, we're with you. You did something we don't like, you hate us. And that's a bad way to be a friend. It's just a bad way to be a friend. So when I see someone say something positive about Jews or Judaism or Israel, who is public, if I get the opportunity, I write them and thank them. And I think Jews should do that, like as a regular practice. If you saw them say something terrible, you'd write them to, anathematize them. So if they say something good, you should say something nice to them. And also, the other thing I think we really need to do, and I want you to do this at your Passover Seder if you have a Passover Seder, is don't only tell your kids how dangerous and terrible it is to be Jewish. Because for most Jews, for most of Jewish history, Judaism was wonderful and rich and beautiful and deep. And that's why they stayed Jews. There is this ridiculous myth that I will now disabuse you of, I hope, that Jews stayed Jews because of anti-Semitism. First of all, there have been a lot of groups throughout history that have been hated. Guess what? The reason you don't know about them is because they don't exist anymore. Most of them disappear. 99% of all the species who ever lived are extinct. Do you know why they're extinct? They're extinct because they met with opposition that they couldn't overcome. Opposition does not make you survive. The species that still live are the species that found ways to adapt to the enemies that existed around them, like human beings. The Jews found ways to adapt. That's why we're here, not because they hated us. If that were the only reason, we would be long gone. And so you have to teach Jews the positive reasons to be Jewish And if I were given like plenipotentiary power in the Jewish world and I said every Jew could take a trip, I would send them to Tel Aviv, not to Auschwitz. Because even though Auschwitz is a powerful experience and I think it's important to go, and I'm not saying that people should not go, God forbid, what we have built is greater than what was done to us. And if you want Jews to be proud, I mean, Jerusalem, if you want, although that was built, most of that was built a long time ago. Tel Aviv is really amazing. If you want Jews to be proud of what it is to be Jews, let them see what Jews have done. And I really do think that that's a big part of our answer to anti-Semitism is look, world, at what we have done. I am not, look, you know how, I don't know, it depends on who it is that sends you emails that you don't read. But a lot of the emails that I don't read are, look how many Nobel Prizes we Jews have won. I get a lot of those. God bless you. But it is astonishing. It's astonishing that Jews have won over 20% of the Nobel Prize of the world. We're 0.2% of the world. We're like nothing. And there's no reason not to be proud of that. We should be proud of that. So I would encourage you to combine gratitude and pride along with fear. Because fear alone is not going to save us. And fear alone is going to drive more Jews underground. Because for every Jew who thinks I'm going to stand up to this, there will be others who say, why do I need it? And unless you tell them why they need it, they're not going to. So I'm going to conclude with that. I have a lot more that I could say and other stories I could tell, but I would rather hear what you want to hear about or comments or questions that you have. And so feel free. Yes, please. Yes. You can't be curious until you're curious out loud.
Now I'm really curious. So I'm curious about all many of these happening at some of our most prestigious universities and institutions, and you would imagine that these institutions would take on the role, take this on in an academic fashion. And it is just so surprising to me that this has not happened. Like, why are there not like conversations in a controlled environment to have a debate, a discussion? Like that doesn't happen. And I'm just, at Harvard,
right. I've said the question is why aren't there like academic controlled discussions? First of all, I want you to know there are lots of them. Like, look at Tarek Masoud. He's had everybody from one woman who tweeted something positive about Hamas to Jared Kushner. He just had Inat Wilf. So they are happening. They're never getting the amount of press that all the protests get. And that's just a reality of the world. We have a tremendous negative bias. This is partly evolution, right? If you walk by a fruit tree and you don't spot the fruit, you're going to be fine. You walk by a tiger and you don't spot it, you're dead. So we pay much more attention to negative things than positive things. That's one. The second is, it is really hard to have a civil conversation when people are deeply reactively emotional about something that is not going to change. The only thing I can try to change is your mind. So these aren't conversations. They are like jousts for victory, right? One of my favorite lines from my friend Joseph Epstein, he says, Jews don't listen, they wait, right? You're talking, I'll wait till you're done so I can tell you what you should really think. And that's what these all seem to devolve into. Right now, nobody's having serious conversations about history or ethic. I've had a couple of debates, and I am willing to debate anybody that I think is not fundamentally a hater. So I had a couple of debates. I had one debate with Gabor Mate. I had a couple of debates with Peter Beinart, who wants a one-state solution, which I think is wrong. But but you can have those debates, and yet I'm not sure that I could have a debate, or even a debate or a discussion with some of the students at Harvard, because it feels so, I mean, I think I would be fine, but I'm older, and to them it feels so visceral, and they're so angry. And the Jewish students feel the same way, many of them. So I think it's hard, and there isn't a lot of training for civil conversation, which is one of the things that all the schools should be doing that they're not doing yet. I hope in time that will happen. But I have to say, one of the least amenable creatures to civilized conversation in the world is a 19-year-old in the grip of a passion, right? Not usually somebody who says, oh, let's sit and reason this out.
Hi, Rabbi. Thank you for your talk. I'm here. You mentioned that the Jews should like build more coalition with other groups. Could you tell a little bit more about like what kind of groups that Jews can build coalition with?
So I would say almost any minority group, and everybody in America now is a minority group. There's no such thing as a majority anymore. So, for example, I'll give you 4 examples. There are people in the Black community that have been reaching out to the Jewish community. I did a beautiful event with Van Jones and Sheryl Sandberg, and I put a service together in which we had rabbis, mostly rabbis, and he invited some Black pastors, including T.D. Jakes, who is probably the most eminent Black pastor in America, who did a prayer for us. And that was a really beautiful thing, okay? The Asian community, because the Asian community in part has undergone the same kinds of discrimination that the Jewish community has in quotas, right? Too many Jews, too many Asians, same, and also has the experience, I think, of banging their head against the university's bureaucracy with almost no positive result. Christians of the left and of the right. I have to tell you, I don't have much patience for people who say, because I disagree with you about another political issue, I won't accept your support for Israel. I think there are I disagree with a lot of Jews about a lot of things too, right? There are Jews who are pro-life, there are Jews who are pro-choice. Am I going to say I won't accept your support for Israel because you're one or the other? So I feel the same way about Christian evangelicals, and I feel the same way about progressive pastors. If you're willing to work with me on this, great. If I find something I can work with you on, great. And then lastly, I think that there are a lot of people who would be willing to speak up if they thought it wasn't so toxic. If we could create safer spaces for people to express their opinions, and that means generally not on social media. Because social media, this is a whole separate question. Social media is difficult not only because of all the reasons that you know, but also because like I think the Chinese government clearly has an interest in making TikTok more divisive, especially anti-Israel more divisive. And I think if we had that weapon to use against China, we would use it, and China has that weapon to use against us, so they'll use it. Nations have interests, as Henry Kissinger famously said, not friends. And also on X, even though I do post, and I don't generally answer the people who answer back, but even there, the algorithms drive for conflict and division because that's what we respond to. So, but interpersonally, I think you can create these kinds of safe spaces, which a place like Hillel can do, or churches, synagogues, mosques can do and have done and should continue to do.
This is working. One topic that is of interest to me is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how many of us have supported DEI, but have felt since October 7th that as Jews, DEI has not been there for us, if you will. How do you think about that?
DEI wasn't made for us. Seriously. So here's what I think about DEI. I really believe that it is terribly important to give help to those students, let's just restrict it at the moment to campus, those students who need help. And to me, I think, especially because I know, and you all know, how much you've gotten in life because of who you know, not only what you know, right? And therefore, it's important to get people in the room, because if they're not in the room, they're not going to know the people who can help them through life. But DEI is built on a racial binary that people who are people of color or somehow in that group is LGBTQ and out of that group are people, even if they, by the way, suffer from economic deprivation, and certainly Jews, because Jews are seen as white and privileged. One of the reasons that Jews are seen as white and privileged is because there is no category Jew in the Western mind, because we came before the West. We're not a religion. We're not a race. By the way, if it surprises you when I say we're not a religion, how many Jews say I don't believe in God. I don't believe in Judaism. Of course I'm Jewish, right? I did this talk with Steven Pinker. So I've done one debate with Steven Pinker and one talk with him. Both, I'm going to quote both. The first time I did a debate with him at Harvard, this was, I don't know, 15 years ago. And it was a debate about God and religion, you know, good, bad, whatever. So I'm sitting, and I've done a bunch of these. I did some with Hitchens and some with Dawkins and some with Sam Harris, and like all whatever. If somebody was a big atheist, I was ready to debate with them. So we sit at the Hill, and the Hillel director introduced us as Rabbi David Wolpe. He's going to do the religion. And here is Steven Pinker, who's going to argue against God. Steven, of course, is a good friend of the Hillels. Now think about that, right? Only in a Jewish space could you have somebody who is a good friend of the Hillels who is there to argue against religion. But Judaism is somehow, we're like a religiously evolved family of some sort, right? So that's why you can join Judaism, right? You can't convert to be a race. So we know we're not a race. And the only way you really leave a family is if you choose a different one. And for Jews, that's basically true. If you leave Judaism for 20 years and you don't do anything and then you come back to shul, so you're, welcome back, right? So, I mean, do you know how many people come up to me? I used to be a member of your synagogue. So, and I don't say to them, oh, well, you're not Jewish anymore. And then the other thing that Pinker said that I thought was really interesting, which was in our recent, which was a discussion and not a debate, also at Harvard Hillel, was he said about negative bias. When I told you before about how we pay so much more attention to that, he said, when I was in college, all anyone talked about was the Vietnam War. Day and night, we were passionate about it. We screamed about it. It's all we talked about. He said, but tomorrow morning you will wake up and there will be no headline in the newspaper, 60 years of no war in Vietnam. And that's because good news doesn't make the paper. It doesn't make the paper. You won't see tomorrow, you won't wake up and no civil war in America. No, you'll see whatever conflict exists in America, that you'll see. And then everybody will say, oh, we're going to have a civil war. But you won't see calm discussion of anti-Semitism at BU. No, you won't see it because it's not newsworthy. So, the DEI was this regime that was put in place when the idea was that there were oppressors and oppressed, and they could be identified purely racially, which is completely, obviously, I mean, it was much truer 60 years ago than it is now. And Jews don't fit any of the categories. So I think that there does need to be on every campus, in every corporation, there needs to be a means of helping people who need help, right? There are people who are born with advantages and people who are born with disadvantages. And I just read, I don't know if any of you read Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. So somebody who's born in Appalachia, right, and doesn't have a father or a mother because they lost them to opioids and makes it to be you, that person ought to be helped, right? They should be helped, and there should be a regime to help them. But you shouldn't look at somebody who comes from Appalachia and say, oh, you're white. You obviously don't need any help. So we need to rethink, and this is happening, by the way. I don't know if you're aware of this, because why should you waste your time and on this? But now I read about this stuff all the time, and DEI regimes are collapsing left and right, all in corporations, in universities. And it's not because all of a sudden people say, oh, we don't have to care about the disadvantaged anymore, but they're realizing that they were configured for what was and not what is. So I'm assuming it will happen here as well. And that's a good thing, I think, I hope.
I was wondering, you touched on there's different types of anti-Semitism for like the holidays, like anti-Semitism for Purim and Hanukkah. I was interested if you could speak a little more about that, because I just want to know what you mean by that.
Sure. So if you remember the story of the Purim holiday, the story was that there was this man named Haman who, for whatever reason, decided he didn't like Jews. And there really wasn't a really good reason. I mean, this guy wouldn't bow down to him. Therefore, if you, you don't hate an entire people because one person won't bow down to you. But the anti-Semitism that he sparked was the anti-Semitism that we have unfortunately seen, for example, in the 20th century, where Hitler tried to do the same thing, which was kill all the Jews. And that's an anti-Semitism of murder. And in Jewish history, it's reasonably rare. Not rare enough, but reasonably rare. Much more often, the anti-Semitism was, let's get all the Jews to convert and not be Jewish. And that's Hanukkah anti-Semitism. It's, I hate you because you're Jewish, so stop being Jewish. And that's much more the anti-Semitism that we see. It is, you're okay if you don't love Israel, or you don't support Israel, or in some way you're not who you are. If you will just change, you'll be okay. And so when I was talking about Hanukkah anti-Semitism, what I meant was Hanukkah anti-Semitism is a function of being proud that you're Jewish, as opposed to having to defend your life because you're Jewish. And thank God, in America especially, it's been much, much, much more the first than the second, or whichever one is first or second. The second than the first.
Hello. Okay. Thank you for being here, Rabbi. Question, we're working across this university with many different people. Curious what, they're not doing a lot to fight anti-Semitism in our perspective. So curious what you think we could do to, either say or do with them in partnership with them to get them to do more, to stand up against Jewish hate, to combat Jewish hate, just like they would do against hate for certainly other students, but they seem to not want to do that when it comes to Jewish students in many instances.
So the reason, part of the reason that they don't want to do that is because they will face opposition. If you stand up against racism or sexual violence on campus, nobody's going to say, how could you do that? But if you stand up against what you call anti-Semitism, people will say, oh, you're trying to get us to shut up about Israel. And so one thing that you need to know about, I mean, you do know about every bureaucracy, is it wants to minimize conflict, period. And it believes that it will minimize conflict more by not dealing with the anti-Semitism stuff than by dealing with it. Or any of you who saw the interview, the hearings with the 3 college presidents, that was more, none of them are anti-Semites. That was the issue. The issue was they just went, everything's fine. It all depends. And so I hate to say it, but The thing that has gotten the college's attention are lawsuits. That's what got their Harvard paid attention. And what got their attention was donors pulling money. It does not so much get their attention to say you're being unfair. And that's because the incentives are much stronger on the shut the door on the say, you're right. I'm so glad you came in to speak to me. I really appreciate it. And we'll look into it. And then you go and then have to think about it for another week. So the question is, what can you do to make not confronting it uncomfortable enough that confronting it will be the only option? And that you need to know the university to know what that is. But I think that's just how human beings work. You know, we don't want to have to deal with things we don't want to have to deal with. And then there is also the other issue that I know because I was a synagogue rabbi, is someone would come in and say, you know, Rabbi, you have to deal with this, and this is what you have to do. And they don't know that the 20 other people who are going to come in and say the opposite or say different or put other pressures, and it's not their job to know, right? That's exactly what it means to run an organization. When you run an organization, though, you have to take a lot of interests into account. And so you just have to, I mean, really, Jews maybe have to be a little less polite. We're very nice. We have to be less nice. And that, the one thing that got, I mean, that clearly got Harvard's attention was both lawsuits and donor money.
To follow up on Ethan's question, what do we say to people who say from the river to the sea is not anti-Semitic? And what do we say to people who would say all these things about us, but if you tell them to substitute black or Hispanic or gay or whatever, pick one, you know, they would say, you can't say those things. But what do we say to these people?
So first of all, from the river to the sea, in particular, I don't know if you saw that Wall Street Journal article about where they asked people what river, which sea. Most of the people who say from the river to the sea think what they're saying is everybody should be in peace. That's what they think they're saying. The actual meaning of from the river to the sea is anti-Semitic because, by the way, in Arabic, it isn't from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. In Arabic, it's from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be Arab. And sometimes Palestine shall be Muslim. It's not free. That's the English translation. So, yeah, the essence of it is anti-Semitic, but a lot of people who say it don't know that. And the sensitivities to different groups are different. And part of what we have, I mean, look, you could say things about white people that you can't say about gay people, right? And that is because someone will tell you, well, the sensitivities and the history are very different. And so America is not good. America is really bad at history. Like I mean, the past doesn't mean very much to us. That's part of, you know, okay, first of all, why is America so successful? I don't care what answer you're going to give. If it isn't these 4 words, you're wrong. You want to know why America is so successful? I can give it to you in 4 words. Canada, Mexico, ocean, ocean. That is the answer, right? Ever looked at a map? Look at what the Middle East looks like. Look at what Europe looks like. What do we have on the Pacific Ocean never threatened us. Trust me, I'm from LA, I could tell you. But seriously, we are so insulated and so safe that the storms of history don't feel real to us. Like what's the I mean, other than killing each other in a civil war, right? What's the worst thing that happened to us since Pearl Harbor? I don't even know where that is on a map, right? And so in Europe, you get a deep sense of history and people really understand what was done to Jews. In America, you don't. I would go to Amsterdam and there are stumble stones, you know, and they have them in Germany as well. This family used to live in this house. So for someone who is 20 years old, the Holocaust is a really ancient memory, and they're sure it probably didn't happen exactly like the Jews said it did. And even if it did, it was a long time ago. And it was a long time ago for people who, you know, who don't have any historical memory of it. And so to build that sensitivity is a difficult thing to do. And what I would say to them is, I know that you don't realize this, but in the living memory of people who are still walking on this earth, a third of all the Jews in the world were murdered. A third of all the Jews in the world. And so when Jews say that they have sensitivities, that's why. It's not so easy for us to forget that. But I think that requires a conversation of a gentle conversation, not a screaming one. Yeah.
And speaking to us.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Thank you for coming and speaking to us. You mentioned briefly about how you also use X and other like social media platforms. Use X, Twitter, sorry, to either post or like listen to things. Do you have any, like, I feel like a lot of social media and other resources I see are just I never know what to believe or think. Do you have any resources, either like books, articles, people that we should turn to like learn, or just as a source?
Oh, do I have resources? So there are some wonderful podcasts that are worth listening to on Israel. I was just talking today. There was a podcast that was that I just listened to today that I thought was outstanding. On Dan Senior's Call Me Back, he had Scott Galloway. And I don't know if you know Scott Galloway, and it doesn't really matter if you do, but it's worth your time, I think. And also, by the way, especially if you're a college student, Scott Galloway is an expert in creating wealth. And at the end of it, he talks about young people and what they should do to both be successful and to create wealth. And he's exactly right when he talks about the fact that the stupidest thing that anybody can tell you when you're a young person is just follow your dream. And if you don't believe that it's stupid, I'm not even going to tell you why. Listen to him. He's absolutely right. He says every graduation speaker is wrong. And he's right. When you listen to him, you'll understand why he says what he says. And he's on point. That will get you to listen to the end, I hope. And also there are a couple of people whose either YouTube or speeches or whatever are worth listening to. Dara Horn is very good. I have, you heard some of it. I have a talk about 23 centuries of anti-Semitism at the Stryker Center in New York that's on YouTube. And Einat Wilf is quite wonderful on Israel and worth reading her book. Noah Tishby's very good. And also, if you want to put a book in the hands of somebody who is not, like I'll tell you who I recommended this. When I first spoke to Claudine Gay and she said, what should I read to know about the history? I didn't want to give her a book that was like hardcore, Jews are always right, kind of. So I suggested a very fine book by Yossi Klein Halevi called Letters to My Palestinian Friend. And I think it's a very good book to read because in there he makes the case that this is not a conflict of right against wrong. It's a conflict of right against right. And it is a conflict of right against right. It's two people caught in a tragic situation. And that's my brother who runs the ethics center at Emory University. He said to me a long time ago, he goes, all the ethical dilemmas we deal with are always right against right. They're never right against wrong, or there's no ethical dilemma, right? It's like if pulling the plug, it's quality of life versus, et cetera. Anyway, so that's at least a start. And I'll tell you one very good, short, funny book by an English comedian, of all people, about anti-Semitism. It's called Jews Don't Count by David Baddiel. And he's very good. Barry Weiss's book is also good about anti-Semitism and very short. But it, depends how much you want. Anyway, I really mean this. I am not just saying this. If you want more or you want to be in touch, just write me. I am more than happy to talk to anybody. I will write you back. I am a compulsive responder to emails because I don't understand how some people have like 7,000 emails on their thing. I literally do not understand it. I must always have an empty inbox or my life has exploded. Yes, please. Okay, Last question. Yell it out.
What would you, if it was entirely up to you, what would you implement into the long-term future of education
Great
to
question.
help this
And
out?
a wonderful one to end with. So I'm not unprejudiced, okay? I really think that just like everybody believes that you should learn about the Greeks, there should be learning about Jews, because you can't understand Western civilization if you don't understand something about Jews. So what I would implement is, in every class of Western Civ, you would have more than just one class of, oh, this is the Old Testament. I think that people need to learn about Jews and Jewish history. We are intimately intertwined with the rest of Western history. And so that would be my ideal. Failing that, at least I would make the history of the 20th century and the Jewish experience of the 20th century part of every curriculum, because it's so incredibly one of the things that people should know, for example, is, I mean, we forget, like World War I, there were all these Jewish heroes in Germany who had medals and were wealthy and were successful. And the speed with which a society can turn from the most enlightened society, the most artistically advanced society in the world, to Germany is stunning. By the way, that's one other thing which I will also want to say when we talk about, is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism? Germany started 2 world wars. I've never heard someone say there shouldn't be a Germany. Never, right? Nobody says, you know, Russia, look what they did to Ukraine. Enough with Russia. We shouldn't have a Russia anymore. The only country ever that I hear people say there shouldn't be this country is Israel. So, I mean, really, I hate to stop. I hate to end on, I mean, really, that does not seem like the most articulate ending for a sermon. So instead, I will say this. I'll give you something to say at your Passover Seder. You know, you break the afikomen in half, and you can't finish the meal without getting it back. So the Kotzker Rebbe said, the only whole heart is a broken one. It is not surprising in this world that we're heartbroken. But in the end, remember that if you don't get the afikomen back, you can't finish. So we pray one day we'll be made whole. Thanks.